it's okay by you, I thought maybe we should start at the beginning. um, uh, uh, in a film that I think is like kind of constantly oscillating between the personal and the autobiographical, and then these more sort of like national, social, political, historical, and so on considerations that are much bigger than like a single person. I'm sort of curious about the starting point for you, and sort of where the sort of fascinating movement of the film from the one thing to the other sort of begins.
How much time do we have here? Just
All
kidding.
at this point all night.
No, no, no. It's very late, and I'm very grateful to everyone who's remained here. Um, it started. The first moment I realized that I need to tell the story was at Nelson Mandela's funeral, where I attended with some of my friends the vigils outside his house, and we were singing a song as a group, as South Africans do every time we're mourning or we're in joy. A song called My Mother Was a Kitchen Girl, My Father Was a Garden Boy, which is an anti apartheid struggle song that's sung at most events. And I remember being at that rally, I mean, not rally, being at the gathering and singing along to the song. My mother was a kitchen girl, my father was a garden boy. That's why I'm a communist, I'm a communist, I'm a communist. And I remember going, wait a minute, my mother and father, though, I mean, not to be taken literally, but my mother and father were people who took briefcases to work and wore high heels and perfume as it's reflected in the film. And it was the first time I had an opportunity to question, wait a minute, is my experience of South Africa the same as everybody else's experience? And my friends from Tanzania and Soweto and the townships that we all know. That's the first time that something got complicated with me. The second moment was the moment when the woman at the Nelson Mandela Square undressed, and no one knew what to say or how to respond to that moment. Or there were various responses to that moment that I was never the same after that. And I've been asking myself, what is it about? Who was she? What did she do? Why did she do that? To this day, it haunts me. And then it was around that same period where I realized we're the grown-ups in the country. Our big hero is no more, and we are now kind of coming out into a state of sobriety as a nation. Um, and I remember going home one day and looking at myself in the mirror, naked, and I refused to. And it was very uncomfortable to look at myself, my hair, my skin, my body. I was refusing this thing, and I remember wondering, why do I hate it? Why is it so normal to be so distanced from this color? Why do I think that there's something wrong with this? And so there were these two political moments, and then there was the personal encounter with, actually it was my hair. It was after a fight with a friend of mine who I wanted to relax my hair after 13 years of not relaxing it, and he was like, why would you do that? And he started mentioning apartheid and like verwoed. I was like, what does verwoed have to do with my hair? What are you talking about? And I kind of realized that something had happened to me, that I wasn't deeply as connected to the story of most people around me as I thought I was. Just because I come in this form, I had accepted some brainwashing, but there was also something else that was kind of murky to me, and so became an oscillation then between the personal and the political, and also an approximation of what it is to be black in South Africa, where you're trying to be a person and then something tells you, no, you're not a person. And so the film is an approximation of, also that's why there's so much in it, because it's almost like I'm trying to invite the audience into my subjectivity and how all of these things make sense all day long, all the time, together. There's this idea of separating them and saying, oh, I just want to deal with this one part. It doesn't hold water, because they're constantly in flux together. Um, and I think the form and the structure of the film is very much informed by that reality. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you both about sort of about the kind of plurality of materials that go into the film. But first, maybe we could like examine the structure a little bit, and because it's very fascinating, I think. And I'm curious. Kind of how the structure sort of presented itself to you, and almost like in the way that the film kind of presents itself, it makes me think that maybe there might almost be some connection to your background as a writer, because in some ways there's a very like writerly trajectory to the whole to that.
Yes, so it's taken 8 years and a bit and some change to make the film. I was working on it with other producers in the first 3 years, and I had this deep insecurity of never having gone to film school. And my whole thing was like, I have to study what the masters have done, I have to study what other people have done, and I was trying to not speak in my own voice. Hankyeol joined us 5 years ago, along with my other producer, Marion Isaacs, who's in Johannesburg. And it was when I met an editor who was, at the time, we actually came to edit the trailer only. And it was when I met Hankyeol when the notion of my own voice, and again returning to the gaze of oneself, became viable and became safe enough to do. Because I had worked with other people who were also black and dealing with the same things that I was dealing with, and we found that there were instances where some of the material was too triggering, some of the conversations we're having were too triggering, and so the voice that was trying to write and trying to make sense of this was sometimes not getting heard because it was inside, it was kind of overshadowed by the politics of it all. And so in 5 years ago is really when the writing that is now in the film came to a reality. And I would, in terms of where it comes from, I mean, my father's a writer, but a lot of dreams, a lot of journaling, a lot of engaging with this idea of poetry being something that I feel like it's the only way, actually. Yeah, I think we focus too much on prose in our lives, and I think poetry was the avenue through which I could tell the story of my country as well as myself. And yeah, we first tried the traditional 3-act structure stuff, and we realized that this is not the story that I want to tell. And it took a lot of courage, and it was a very painful process to hear the sound of my own voice for the first time. To hear the crackle, to lean into the vulnerability, the insecurity, the fact that, I'm not really finding any reference points for this thing that I want to do. Every time I look, everywhere I look, I'm not finding this thing. And so to trust in one's own voice and one's own vision took a lot of courage, took a lot of practice, and took a lot of support by a collaborator who really, from the get-go, truly understood what I was trying to do and knew how to put herself and her eyes and her ears and her spirit into it as well, while not overshadowing and silencing the thing that I was trying to do. So working with Hankyeol was a true collaboration, and it's also her first feature film. And so the insecurity that exists on one hand influences where we were able to go together structurally, because we knew we had to create a language that didn't really exist for the things that we were trying to say and do. And that takes a lot of, again, courage, and it wasn't always pretty. It wasn't always pretty to trust, and even the letting go process, we still watch and we're like, oh my God, we could change so many things. But at some point we had to, stop and let go. And yeah, I think.
I mean, can I add a little bit to that?
Of
Yeah.
course. Yeah.
I mean, I think there was also just an incredibly intuitive process. I think that the structure is very, it makes sense to me now. Hopefully it makes sense to everybody as well, but it really makes a lot of sense to me now. But I think the process of finding that structure was really a process of discovery for both of us. Like, I think when we first started editing this film, I was just like, oh my God, in film school, the only subject that I didn't take was script writing, and like, I have no idea how to structure a film. And there's also something beautiful about that, the fact that Milisuthando didn't go and study filmmaking, and that I, in many ways, the normal 3-act structure and all of that stuff was something also completely foreign to me in my education, that we managed to embark on a process of discovery in trying to figure out what would work best for this film. And as Milisuthando says, like there was a real process of going down as many different avenues as possible, the traditional modes, coming out and being like, no, this is not what we want, and then getting sucked back into it and being seduced by it, and then having to once again come back out. And I think that there was just a great deal of synergy between us and a real desire to be as playful and as experimental in that process, and a patience within that
faith.
space, and a
Yeah.
deep, immense sense
Honestly,
of
it was
faith.
like going into a forest, a dark forest at night with machetes only and blindfolded. That it was like this. We were like, should we try this? And but intuitively, I knew what was right. I knew how I wanted the voice and the tone and the timbre, and how I wanted the image to interact with the sound. And we had a really, it was a very sacred space that we also created for ourselves, because we knew that we're not working with entities. It's not me and her only. The archive is alive. The celluloid is alive. These are people's lives. These are people's faces. These are people's voices. Our own ancestors. And we were also trying to look at new ways at how to read history, you know? And so it's a lot of stuff was kind of like we went rogue, and we were like, hopefully people will understand it. Yeah.
Yeah, sort of somewhat in relation to that, and I think this is something you can both speak to. I'm curious about. Yeah, I mean, like I said, there's such a plurality of kinds of material that found their way into the film, and so I'd love to hear from you both about sourcing like the archival material that finds its way into the film, and then performing like this very complicated dance of figuring out how it fits with new footage, home movies, like seemingly like all kind, every kind of audiovisual material you can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the first brief to myself and to Hanky was that I don't want apartheid. I'm really trying to understand apartheid. I'm curious about it. While I'm hurt by it, while I'm harmed by it, I'm really trying to understand, how did this thing happen? Why did it happen? Why does it continue? How does it continue to live in us? And so I wanted to explore the psychic wound that is invisible, because we're not all walking around with crutches as much, but the wounds exist somewhere in our spirits, in our hearts, in our minds, and on our bodies in many cases. And so, how do I represent that thing? How could we visually represent this thing that I'm looking for, which is that psychically it's still there, and we have not even begun to touch and to face and to look. And so I had to become curious while I was dealing with my own pain and wounding from it. And that curiosity led me to a perspective of saying, I don't necessarily want to see the same representations. I think a lot of us have become, we were raised on that, on a diet of those images, and the world knows those images, and they are important images. However, what exists beyond this, and because I wasn't chased by a policeman with a cannon and a dog and a gun, but somehow I live with this pain. So how do I represent this thing that you can't see, but is felt by everybody in every single encounter in South Africa? And so I wanted to look at the feminine representations of apartheid, because the masculine ones are the ones where the people are doing in the streets, and it's the men attacking each other, and it's loud, and it's like we're fighting, we are invulnerable. And I wanted to just find out, what is the vulnerable? When am I'm vulnerable when I'm sitting in a room full of white people and I'm afraid. What is that fear? What is the shape and the form of that fear? How does it taste? How does it look? And so the feminine exploration then led us to looking at what were women in apartheid doing, what were black women, what were white women doing, how did it exist in those domestic private spaces. And that led to an exploration of images of the intimate and within relationships. And luckily, Hanky and I, we just knew whenever we encountered certain things, like, yes, this is in the line of this particular brief. And to a large extent, when we discovered or found or were given some of this archive, because we had somebody who knew what we were doing, and who was like, hey, there's some footage that's never been seen in South Africa, that's never been seen in the world, and that I would love to share with you, because I hear what you guys are doing and I want to support it. And that person and people, it was a group of people, shared some of that footage with us. And when we found it, it was very, very painful to watch, It was not easy to watch that stuff because it's not the typical stuff with the gun. It was the ideas that come before a person is pointing at the gun, the belief, the faith, the more insidious stuff, which is far more dangerous actually. And sorry, I'm losing my train of. I think I've lost my train of thought because this is what it was like.
It's a good train of
Archive
thought.
dumpster diving. This is what it felt like.
But there was also a sense of, I mean, like you and I, we would constantly always speak about how, you know, this thing that you say about how the archive has a life of its own. And there was a feeling, in a sense, of a lot of these things coming to us and feeling like they had a will to be seen as well.
Yes, that's what I wanted to say. The archive wanted to be found too. Yes, that's it. We were looking for it, but we also feel the archive itself wanted to be found so that the questions that we were posing of what was the philosophy of apartheid actually, why did it, so that it too could come and confess. And there's some aspect of the film that function as a confessional. That's why the gaze is not so much on black people being shot at and running away, because I was like, wait a minute, it's always us sitting on stages talking about representation and race as if we're harming ourselves, as if it's us who are just going on and on. Like the other end of the stick is a society and a white identity and a white consciousness and a white imagination that's on the other side of this thing. So I'm interested in what white children are brought up in South Africa believing, thinking. At which point does somebody go, oh, this person who's my nanny, who I'm on her back all day long while my mother and father are at work. At which point do I know when they say kafir, they mean her? What's the difference? At which point, like, how do you love someone and feel close to them, and on the other hand, know exactly where to point when someone says that word? And this was the relationship between my inquiry and history, and then the archive was just trying to show us that I'm not mad, this does exist, you know? Hanky, do you want to say something?
There's also such a fascinating aspect about film 3, which is where a lot of the home video archive exists, the 1990s black families and black households. And because of the nature of apartheid and the nature of what technologies black people had access to and what households were able to buy video cameras and film their children and that kind of, you know, that material was very, very hard to find and very scarce. And it started becoming a representative of, you know, Millie's own home life, but also then what the black experience within South Africa in a subjective manner, because I think that material, when we think of the beautiful family home video archive, we're very, very, very well accustomed to what it looks like in a white household, you know, what that, but we had to, like, you had to reach out to your friends, and then their friends were asking their friends to see if, you know, any people had home videos.
We ended up with 6 cassettes.
6 video cassettes.
Only.
From a whole network of people scrounging together. And I think that was just a really, really just such a specific aspect of one of the challenges of making this film in South Africa, with and how the politics just seep completely and utterly into even just accessibility of material and archive.
Yeah, I want to ask one more question, then we'll see if the audience wants to know anything. I was hoping you could tell us a bit about the experience of conducting the disparate kinds of interviews that are in the film, and I'm especially curious. I mean, and this, you know, sort of accounts. This is one of the most confessional elements of the film, but the using this device of I'm not sure if it's like a camera with a lens cap left on for some of the interviews that come in the second half of the film, or if it's just image lit, the image has been removed or what have you. But yeah, so on the one hand I'm curious about that device, but I would also be curious to hear you talk about conducting the interviews in general for the film.
So it's 8 years worth of material, 8 years worth of me talking to my family, my friends, different friends, ex-boyfriends, about who they've known me to be, who I've been in these 8 years, and their understandings of history, asking people the same question over and over and getting the different answers. And it was very, very difficult to distill and reduce everything that it ended up in the film, starting in film one with my mother and my uncle and my grandmother even. And then in film four, I think the setup of that whole segment is that I was trying to look at my relationship with my white friends. So I was one player, Marion was another player, and Bettina was another player. And there are many, many hours of conversation between me and the both of them. And we initially we filmed both of them. We initially filmed using Hankyeol's Sony A7S camera, and there was something discomforting and uneasy about the crispness and the clarity of the footage, and it felt like it's not this film. And we tried to, first we tried to film, and we watched our own responses to it. And I was like, why am I getting distant? Why is there distanciation? Why am I feeling like there's a complexity between me as the viewer who's black listening to these white women when their images come up? Something happens. I don't want to hear them because of where we are right now. I might not. There's something that I'm like unfairly doing to them as people. I didn't want to instrumentalize them because they're my friends, but at the same time, I was watching my own reaction that there's a discomfort when I engage their images. That was one of the first reasons. The second reason was when we did use their images, my other concern was I'm trying to tell a story in which different people from all parts of the world where we've all been affected by racism and colonialism and its legacies can watch this and not go, oh, this is just her problem. Because I think a lot of times in South Africa, in our encounters with white people, people go, oh no, that's just her problem. There's always ways people are trying to create distance to not enter. And so when we took away the image, we found that this is more risky. This is probably more difficult to watch, but it's functioning as a confessional and in a way that protects me, the viewer, who is black and might not want to encounter that image, but also doesn't put everything solely on the shoulders of Marion and Bettina and Jess even. That yes, these people saying these things, but ultimately something else. When we remove the image, the audience and the person watching is forced to engage it in themselves. And the third aspect was me behind the camera, and wanting to explore my own anxiety and discomfort with inside these relationships, my own vulnerability. I didn't want to be the turning the gaze on the white people and saying, I'm here looking at you. There was also, in film 4, especially in the conversation with Marion, where I'm also dealing with my own shame and invulnerability and things that that are not the stuff that is said by black powerful girls and like black girl magic. I was like, who are we when we're not being magical? There's many times when I'm not magical and I'm scared and there's all these other feelings. And so I also want to center that part, and the use of my image being placed and then taken away is also, again, it's a conversation with black audiences who might feel the same way about focusing the gaze, unfocusing the gaze, focusing the gaze, unfocusing the gaze. What does that do when someone's watching? I knew what it did to me, and I was like, I don't think this thing can be perfect, but this is as much as we can temper, touch, try to express this thing And the audience responses have been very vast. Some people like it, some people don't like it. Some people feel that it is obfuscation, others feel like this is great. It gives them a chance to look at themselves. And also, interestingly, working with this idea of cinema, and then what does it mean to take away light? What does it mean to also ask questions to cinema itself and to comment on the technology? From the beginning of the film, I was very not confident about holding the camera. As you can see, there's a lot of stuff that's out of focus, and I was very insecure about that because I was like, I'm still trying to work this tool that has been denied from me for all these years, and in that section, it's also a comment for me as a filmmaker, and also somebody who's pointing a camera at a white person, that this comes at a cost. It's not easy. It wasn't. I mean, some people were like, yes, we will be filmed, and others, once we had filmed them, said they asked questions about, can I see how my image is being used? And I had to be like, no, you can't see, because then that's challenging the power dynamics between us, and this is about trust. It's about forming trust, and was that achieved? I don't know. We still have to take this film home and see how people respond there. But throughout, the themes and the questions are even imprinted in the structure and the form and the that particular section or already, yeah.
All right, let's see if anyone in the audience has any questions. If you have a question, just raise your hand. We'll bring you a microphone, and we'll start right down here.
So something that stood out to me the most in the film was from the archival footage when the father was being asked how he feels about his son attending the school, and him saying that his son is going to make friends, and then those friends are going to show the elders how to behave or how to coexist. And then I think that comes back full circle to what you were just discussing about showing some difficult conversations that you have with people, and then figuring out a way to convey that through the film. So I was just wondering, particularly in like the context that we're seeing of the world right now, with a lot of people who may have like differing opinions or may be on opposite sides, how do you think that this is sort of, with this festival being like the future of filmmaking, how do you feel like this is going to shape your influence as a director, or maybe take a certain direction with documentary filmmaking of showing people that they can have these conversations and act in these ways?
Sorry, the question is, how do I think what is going to shape my
Like this approach that you took with this film is going to shape your repertoire as a director in general.
Yeah. Well, I think that my belief is that the antidote to fascism is intimacy. And so how do we find ways to walk very slowly, creep towards intimacy? Because we've all grown up in fascistic systems, especially in this country and South Africa. And how do we undo that? What do we do with the deeds of our ancestors? What they did to each other, what some people's ancestors did to other people's ancestors, etc., etc. And I think the way we've approached the form and the structure and the very feminine and poetic way we decided to make the film in is going to give people permission to go in that, hopefully other artists and filmmakers and writers and storytellers, permission to go more into that realm of the intimate, which is very, very frightening. And it's the thing that right now people have found many ways to go against, even as they stand on very respectable stages and say very understandable things like, I want to protect myself and preserve my humanity and my safety from engaging with white people, and so I will limit my friendships. I will limit my friendships with men. I will limit my friendship with cishet men, etc. These are very valid responses. I think people should definitely find as many ways as possible to self-preserve. However, what is our role as storytellers? What is our role as filmmakers? How do we help and how do we excavate ourselves actually in the how do we become intimate in our own pursuits of making art, of making films. And this requires a facing of self, a facing of history, a facing of archive, a facing of all the things that we don't want to look at. And I don't know, I think in the same way that therapy is becoming so normalized, we're going to have to find our own way as storytellers to a language. We're going to have to create a lexicon for what it means to be able to tell, to revisit history in this particular way. Again, it's going into the feminine, the interiority, being interested in that, and finding ways to making new words for these things that we feel, but we don't necessarily, the language doesn't exist yet.
If I can just add to that, I mean, I think one of the first things that, or one of the first like really big briefs that Millie gave to me was, despite all of the intense subject matter that this film was uncovering and unearthing, there was a real desire that she had that audiences should feel held. And that's also one of the things that informed the structure, that yes, there are all of these things, you know, the political and then the personal and, chapters, but the reason why these beautiful, poetic, spiritual pieces of writing, what we ended up calling the transcendental voices throughout the film, was because there was a sense of needing the audience to feel held in the process of uncovering all of this. And I think that from the beginning, there was a sense of like, we want to go to these very hard places, but we also want there to be some level of gentleness and some level of care involved. We don't want to be irresponsible with the audiences, that what's actually essential and necessary for these conversations to happen is that it has to feel safe. The space has to be safe. And we can create that, or we can really try to create that cinematically.
And love. We have to be guided. What is love? And how do you translate it on this? What is, sonically, what is love? How? And I had to figure out what it means to, exactly that, exactly what Hankye's saying. And I think love is also a question that we must always keep asking ourselves as storytellers.
Do you guys want to? You can do rock, paper, scissors.
Oh, it's okay. Oh, um, so I don't know how to word the question because this is on the spot, but I want to hear you talk about the relationship between the religious, ritualistic elements in the film, um, and the connection that is sort of made with, like, is it Mandela, is it God, but also like these like Western religions based on like Christianity, and like kind of just putting them in a space where they're also sort of intermingling with um I'm gonna say ancestral, but um practices that just have been part of like um Black people's lives, you know, throughout history, that then sort of just get religions like burning incense and just like these ritualistic practices like that you explore in the film. I just want to hear you talk about it because I thought that there was something there that I feel like resonated with me, and I'm not like South African, but I could resonate with that as sort of like a Black experience. Um, and I can't word it right, but I feel like you will.
I didn't invent anything. I didn't create anything. all I did was just tell the story as it exists. This is how these things exist in us as people. They're intermingling with each other all the time. Christianity, as well as indigenous religions all over the world, are forever bumping up against each other. I just come from a culture that was never afraid to explore both and to look at the reality that, yes, you know, we go. I asked my dad once when I was 17 and I was quitting Christianity. I said to him, me and this religion, juices, I'm out. And he was like, that's cool, my child. Go and explore, but you have to believe in something. Go and do whatever you want, but you have to believe in something. You can't walk around in life not believing anything. And he gave me a ticket to go and explore becoming a Buddhist for like 7 years, and other types of spiritual. I was exploring until I returned home into Isintu. But inside of that, I was listening to gospel music. Inside of that, I was singing hymns. Whenever we go home, we pray every Sunday. We pray before we go to bed. And inside those prayers, we're singing hymns. And these are Christian hymns, but these are Christian hymns that have been extended and remolded and refashioned because the Africans and people of African descent, we've done this. We've had no choice but to undo fascism. This is what our humanity is. It's literally the undoing of the splitting and the separation. And so this is something that existed at home in this way, and I feel like in a lot more places this is how it exists, rather than the systems that are created to say, no, this one is not a real religion and here's the real religion. And I knew that this would happen. Having traveled to America, gone to church in America, seen exhibitions and been like, I know this thing from home. They may be holding a candle, they may be wearing these things, but the rhythm of this, the sound of this, the way these people are moving around the circle, I recognize this from home. And of course, this is the human story. I think in any I come from a religion that is not threatened by Christianity. It said, okay, fine, let's take it on, but let's make it our own. That's why the women in the red, the Methodist women in the red, you're not going to find them here. That's a very Southern African expression of Christianity, which invites it because it knows at the base, uNkulunkulu, uThixo, umdali, this entity that is called God, in English, it's not threatened by the other thing. And so I was trying again to just say, hey, this is what it's like here, because I know that it's not just South Africa, it's reflected everywhere. Yeah.
So we have time for one final question. Well, it's right there.
First of all, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I first wanted to say before my question is that I've never seen or heard anyone discuss the sort of element of uh, white womanness and sort of that soft cruelty that happens in interactions with white women. I've never seen that talked about in any film, and that's actually something that I've been personally grappling with a lot, as well as like the idea that like you have to sort of become friends and be liked by the people who you sort of feel uncomfortable around in order to reach for a better life. So first of all, like thank you for sharing that because that resonated with me so incredibly deeply. And I've never seen it happen in cinema. But my question is, how did you take care of yourself while you made this film over the course of like almost a decade? It's really difficult subject matter, and it's really difficult to, you know, we have a lot of feelings as Black women and we experience a lot of different things as Black women. So when you sort of identify language for those feelings that you feel, how did you take care of yourself?
Thank you for your question and what you said. This is a very important question. In speaking to your question also about the future of how we'll be making films, we will have to take our emotions and psychology into consideration. We always spoke of having a therapy budget in the film. We never eventually had it because we're still fundraising. It's very expensive to make films. But we all needed it. Hankyeol needed it, I needed it, Marion needed it. But fortunately, I am in therapy twice a week, even now. I started that process in 2020 because seeing that material, we were looking for hours directly into the heart of evil. people planning our demise, people planning our destruction. And it wasn't a mistake, it wasn't a, oh, maybe, no, you see the lines being drawn, you see the numbers and the figures. And so that was extremely painful to watch. And
It actually made us all very physically ill. We all bore very different physical ailments from that period as well. That, I mean, we still carry them today.
so therapy twice a week became, and I went to a white therapist, a woman therapist, who, when I was trying to find her, I was dealing a lot with the trauma of the childhood trauma from these Model C schools, being 10-year-olds sent directly into the lion's den without our parents. And I wanted to find somebody who was going to approximate the way that those teachers looked so that I could figure out how to say some of these things that I couldn't say because I was 10, and how many of us couldn't say because we were kids, to somebody else. And she's an excellent therapist in that she was able to, and she's still continuing to really help me with that other side, that more vulnerable side, that is not the one that's protesting in the streets. And that is messy, difficult for both of us work. It's very relational work. And secondly, there's been a lot of rituals that I've done. These are real rituals. It wasn't from when I was a child, but in the process of making the film, in order to look and to ask certain ancestors questions, I had to cleanse myself many times. I had to sick. I've got how many healers? I've got Tulu, I've got Ntate Serote, Sisvela. And these were people that I saw at different stages. One was almost like a conceptual healer, where I would sit and discuss some of these ideas and say, how do we deal with the figure of Verwoerd? How do we deal with the figure of Mandela? How do we deal with Oliver Tambo? And so first it was philosophical discussions and conversations while the talismans and the bones are there, and my ancestors are showing up and saying, you do have to go there. We know you don't want to go, but you have to go. Then to the other one, I'd go for cleansings, to be like, well, not cleansings, protection. Because I'm going into a zone that I can't just as a young spirit. She would call me. I'd be doing something and she'd be like, Milisuthando, what are you doing? I see you buying candles. And I'd be like, oh my God, I'm buying candles. What are you preparing? You can't go into the ancestry of the nation without protection. Come, let's do a protection ritual for you. Another healer was obviously there's side effects to these things, and sometimes I would go to her, so I would have bad dreams, and some things would show up physically, and then I would need to cope. And inside that process, though, I was also learning about the resilience of indigenous knowledge, the resilience of indigenous knowledge systems and healing systems. And I got to the religion aspect of the film because at some point the intellectual pursuit had limitations. I could read all the books, I could look at all the films and look at all the things and deal with my intellect, but I was like, but inside my heart at 3 a.m. in the morning, it's very painful. How do I resolve that? How do I resolve the fact that it's showing up physically? For Hankyeol, who's not like me, Hankyeol's very expressive, but sometimes when it comes to things would come out physically for you, where you'd get a full body rash. And we'd be like, Hanky, are you okay? But again, we were all engaging our ancestors collectively. And so for me especially, I've gone through so many rituals and cleansing and taken it to my family, and I've had the most incredible support from my family. That bowl that you see at the beginning and the end of the film with that young girl was during a reconciliation ritual, which is also what the film speaks about, this idea of being reconciled from our ancestors whose names we don't know, whose stories we don't know, but whose scars we feel, and whose aches we feel in our bodies. What does it mean to reconcile through ritual? I couldn't have done this work without that aspect of things. And I think this is also, again, how I hope the future of storytelling, of course, it's not in a world of streamers and business and everything. It's never going to work like that, But for this other avenue that hopefully Africa and the global South will do a lot to bring into the world, because these are the realities that we live. We go to work, we put on masks, we smile, we have uncomfortable conversations, but then we do also have these other spaces where there's a whole other different world. And I think the storytelling and the filmmaking of the future, it needs for us to go and find these things and to legitimize them and to put them into the canon of academics, of film language, of cinema, of all of it. And that work requires serving. This is what me and Hanky, all three of us, with Marion, this is the word we constantly use. We are serving at the altar of something that's bigger than us. And the service requires humility, requires silence. You know, I was not on social media for the last 4 or 5 years because I was like, well, I got to choose to be outside in the street, or I got to choose to, I'm taking this very seriously. This is like the work of my life. And that's the personal in the personal documentary. It's not necessarily the thing of me sharing stories about my family. It's because I went into the deepest depths of myself. And not everyone can do that, and not everyone must do that. But in order to dare to try to create a language for some of these things, we do have to go there. We will have to go there. And to support each other and to legitimize, especially as filmmakers of color and filmmakers who are women and non-binary and trans, we have to figure out how to support each other in, breaking these new grounds. Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, we have to leave it there for now. But Milisuthando, Hankyeol, thank you for this. Thank you for the beautiful film. Thank all of you for staying up late with us. And
thank you, really, really.
Yeah, and that's it.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.